Hello everyone, I'm your host Walt Schammel with the Florida Aviation Network. We're broadcasting live and in the clear from the Florida Air Museum, the Sun and Fun Complex located in Lakeland, Florida. This is the 40th year for Sun and Fun. Our guest today is Ravi. Ravi, tell us a little bit about yourself and your outreach program.
Well, thanks for having me. I love being part of Sun and Fun and being here in the aviation industry and as you mentioned, an outreach program, going out and getting people to come into the aviation industry. Now, I will say as an industry, we do a job, at least, I don't know if it's a good job or a bad job, of trying to bring people into aviation. What I'm really trying to do is bring aviation to people, and that's why it's an outreach program. Take the message of aviation, the values, the skill set, the story of aviation out into the community. And that's really something that I learned when I just became a pilot not so long ago, only in 2008, and recognized this truly awesome opportunity to participate in one of humanity's greatest achievements, the magic of flight. And that's when I became the Raviator, and just sort of managed to meld my name with the Aviator and go out there as the brand, as the Raviator brand, and let kids know, and everybody know for that matter, that they can be part of this. The message is you can do it, and that's what my outreach program is called, the You Can Do It Tour.
And you've talked about the You Can Do It Tour, and you've been in several different places. And each place you use the home base and you do 5 or so different presentations. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the focus of it is to not just go out there and inspire young kids, high school kids really, to consider aviation not only as a potential career, but just as something that's great to do no matter what they decide to do in life. But the idea is to inspire them to do that, but give them a follow-through mechanism as well, because that's where I think we often fall short. We can go out there and make people want to do it, but then where do they go? So the first thing I do is I partner with a flight school, and the National Association of Flight Instructors, NAFI, helps me identify a flight school that has a great track record of converting people into pilots. And so I want to go after the best flight schools in the country. Well, that determines where I'm going to go. So once I know where I'm going to go, then I start a PR campaign. So it's not just about getting the aviation organizations and the aviation media to cover it, but to get the mainstream media, that local paper, to cover the fact that I'm coming to their town to do an event that the public can come to. Now, there are actually 3 different types of events that I do at each location. There's a pilot event. That's a call to action. That's to bring the pilot community together and say, guys, you want to complain about the cost of fuel, you want to complain about insurance, we don't have leverage until we're a growing industry. As long as we're shrinking, we don't have the leverage to change that. So we need to band together and bring more people into our club, the Club of Aviators. And I've got something for you. I've got a public event coming up tomorrow or the next day, depending on the schedule. Invite your non-pilot friends to come to that. Bring them along, and let's introduce them to this wonderful opportunity, the magic of flight. Now, in between those 2 events, I go to every high school possible. And I go to affluent high schools, I go to minority high schools, I go to STEM academies, science, technology, engineering, and math focused academies, to try to go to various different groups of teenagers who can now make contact with the local flight school, because I've got a flight school partner, and then can actually not just have a dream, but actually realize that dream by the local community, pilot community, who I spoke to a day or 2 earlier. So it's really about creating a very solid foundation in a community to nurture new pilots. And that comes complete with the local flight school usually offers free discovery flights, which I can give out to those students who have that spark in their eye, and I know that they're going to really respond well to it. I have scholarships. Scholarships that range in money, but I have, $1,500 scholarship, which $1,500, by the way, represents 25% of my training costs to become a sport pilot. So it's not insignificant. And I have that opportunity to give those students, the ones who really deserve it, that scholarship. So there's a whole program now in this local community that not only inspires the dream, but gives them a infrastructure to pursue the dream and gives them the financial support to accomplish that dream. And I'm very proud of that. And I have to really give a lot of props to my sponsors who made it possible, which is the Lightspeed Foundation, the Sporties Foundation, and Sennheiser Aviation. And those three combined with NAFI, who really helped me find the best flight schools, has made what was the first phase of the You Can Do It tour, I think, a success. And I'm looking forward to now entering the second phase of the You Can Do It tour through the 2014-15 school year.
Ravi, I can tell that you're really enthusiastic and dedicated to aviation, and you can see a great future in it for yourself and for others. How in the world did you get into aviation from the Hanson Band?
Yes, I was a guitar player of Hanson back in the late 90s and really lived my dreams in that industry. I can't tell you how amazing it was to grow up in the suburbs of New York City, seeing all my guitar heroes at Madison Square Garden, and then one day taking the stage of Madison Square Garden myself, or the David Letterman show, Jay Leno show, playing at the White House for President Clinton. I mean, all amazing experiences. And I had a wonderful career in the music industry, I still do, and spent a lot of time on the road. But then what happened in 2008? That the economy tanked. I wasn't on the road quite as often as I was used to, maybe 75 days instead of my usual 150. My wife turns to me and says, you know, you've always wanted to fly an airplane. Now you've got the time to learn. And so that's exactly what I did. I went to the local flight school, I learned to fly an airplane, and was absolutely dumbfounded to find out that there was a shrinking pilot population, because I thought this was the greatest thing in the world. Everybody should do it, if only for the experience, because the skill set that you learn in the cockpit of an airplane applies to virtually everything you do in life. And that was really my transition of how I went from the music industry into the aviation industry. But I'm still the guy with the guitar, and in fact a foldable guitar that you can fit in any airplane, who's running around the flight shows and performing as a musician as well. Music is still a very, very big part of my life.
Well, you talked about the shrinking pilot population. Of course, the large number of pilots that we trained in World War II are passing on now, and of course they haven't flown in years. But the FAA statistics say that only 0.16% of the population are pilots.
Yeah.
Now those are pilots that hold the certificate, but they may not be flying today. We don't know that. That's a very small sliver of the population. Yet we learned in 9/11, when they grounded all civil aircraft the next day, the effect of that small portion of pilots had on this entire country. People didn't know how much went by aviation, how much people needed it, the speed to get from A to B, do their business, perhaps vacation. Are you interested more in the commercial aviation, the civil aviation side, or the general aviation side, or just aviation in general?
You know, I'm interested in all of it, but I'll say global aviation. I believe that an important message to send people is that aviation is not just something we do in America. It's a global opportunity. And while there is certainly shrinking pilot population around the world and smaller pilot populations in other countries, you look at a country like India, for example. I'm half Indian. You look at a country like India and you recognize that they have a booming economy now, but they don't have an infrastructure of highways and railways in order to service that growing economy. The obvious answer, now that we have GPS, is airstrips and general aviation. So once those skies become a little friendlier to civilian aircraft, then I see a huge growth opportunity for general aviation in countries like India, like China, like Russia, these vast land masses that don't yet have the infrastructure on the ground to service them. This is not a new idea. We saw this same thing happen in telecommunications. All those countries were using cell phones before we were in America because we had a landline infrastructure. They didn't. So they started using cell phones before we did. I think we're going to see a parallel to that in how aviation will be used overseas. So I see many opportunities in aviation. The commercial sector, we know the bad image that the commercial sector has. So we know that the job prospects as they stand today are not very appealing for young people to go to. But we also know that because of a shrinking pilot population, there's going to be a supply and demand opportunity. Market forces are going to shift and are going to, by just the nature of market forces, make it more appealing to become a commercial pilot. So I think that is another wonderful highlight of the opportunities in aviation. Boeing, what do they say? About 500,000 shortage by 2031 of pilots, a little less than that, but a little more than that for technicians. There's going to be a great need for pilots everywhere. You mentioned the FAA. What do they say? Under 0.2% are pilots, and that makes mathematical sense. If you look at what are we? A little over 300 million is our population as a country, and what are we? Under 600,000 as a pilot population. So that's the 0.2%. Another alarming statistic, though, is that over the last 10 years, we've seen a drop-off of private pilot certificates issued by 41% less. So there's a significant decrease in that. That's something we have to address. AOPA statistics come out and say 80% of flight students drop out before obtaining their certificate. I mean, we're operating on an unbelievable failure rate there that has to be corrected. We should be graduating more than 20%. So there are a lot of factors, and this is actually why the You Can Do It tour I think is very important, because it addresses the flight training community, it addresses the public, and it expresses the value of general aviation, and it addresses the high school and showcases some of the career opportunities on a global level for people to develop the skill, earn their certificate, and go out and use it all around the world.
To a certain extent, though, we've always had the same problems you just talked about. Time, money, the interest is frequently there, but the other two aren't. Sometimes the other two are there and the interest isn't. With your ambassador program with Sun and Fun, how are you addressing some of this to get some of those particular people you're after into the community of aviation?
Well, when we look at the cost of aviation, I mean, one of the things that I found, you know, as I mentioned, that the $1,500 scholarship represents about 25% of what I paid to become a sport pilot. So I spent $6,000 to become a sport pilot. What amazes me is if I were to amortize that over a year, that's $500 a month. Most people are spending more than $500 a month on something that means less to them than pursuing the dream of flight. So I think there's a large number of people there that we can make the economic argument that they can actually afford it if they budget for it and understand the economics of becoming a pilot. Then there's the flight school component. You know, aviation is expensive if you're having a lousy time learning it because your flight instructor isn't nurturing you or giving you a great experience. But on the other hand, aviation's cheap if you're having the time of your life because your flight instructor is giving you a great experience. So people say that cost is a factor and that they don't pursue aviation because of cost. I don't believe it. It's because of value. It's the cost experience equation that equals value. They're not getting the value out of it. And that is good because that's something we can control. We can create more value by creating a better experience. You mentioned the interest level. You know, so here we are in the museum and you look up and you see all these amazing airplanes. It's beautiful. But where are kids looking today? They're looking down. They're looking at their phones and texting. So there's automatically a change. Kids used to look in the sky. Now they're looking somewhere else. So I'm a big believer in mobile technology. I have my own app, and you know, these things at iRavi.mobi are where people can go, young people can go in an environment, an electronic environment that they're familiar with, used to, and find scholarships. They can find local flight schools. They can find all sorts of things to help generate that interest. Because while I agree with you that I think the interest is still there in a very innate way, we as a society aren't nurturing that interest. So I don't think that people know that they're interested in flight. I don't think they think about how amazing it is that we as humanity have accomplished that. I said that earlier, you know, the magic of flight, one of humanity's greatest achievements. You can push me out a door, I'll walk on the ground. You can push me off a boat and I'll float. There is nothing natural about this. We conquered it as aviators, as humans. The magic of flight. So I think, you know, we have the interest is there, but we need to fan the flame. It's a spark. We need to fan that spark and develop it into a flame, and then make sure we're giving a positive infrastructure in order to create an environment where people can pursue that and actually become pilots.
I've been involved in aviation for 58 years, and I can remember back when I was a student pilot that the FAA and industry was talking about the fact that we can't get student pilots into the system. We're not issuing enough student pilot certificates. And you bring up a good point about get them involved, get them interested, and then keep them that way. There's some alternatives. One of our biggest competitors in aviation is the RV industry. We get a lot of advertising for RVs, but I sure don't see any advertising for aviation.
Yeah.
What do you think we should do in the future?
Well, I think that we really need to focus on the value of STEM education through aviation. I think that's actually the smartest way we as an industry can, for lack of a better word, infiltrate young minds with the magic of flight. And it's not just the young minds, it's the teachers. When I go into a school, I am taking 45 minutes to an hour of time away from those teachers that they have with their students. That's valuable time. I have a tremendous responsibility to those teachers to make sure that that time is well used. So my job when I go in there is not to just inspire the kids, it's to empower the teachers. It's to make every one of those kids recognize the value of their education and the value of what their teachers are trying to teach them. It's a huge opportunity, STEM education through aviation, and as we say at Sun and Fun, building a brighter future through aviation. That is, I think, the real golden opportunity we have as an industry, because you learn more about life, more about yourself, and more about every school subject through the process of flight training than through any other activity that I can think of.
You talked about when you got through with the band, or as you were working with the band and things were slowing down a little bit, that your wife said, why don't you start flying? She probably didn't just come up with that thought, did she? You probably talked about it, it was an interest.
Absolutely.
How far back can you recall that you had an interest in aviation and wanted to learn to fly?
My father was an international businessman, and he used to take flights on the Concorde and on 747s, which was always my dream. And he'd always bring models back of the planes, in the days, or the wings, or whatever it was that the airlines would give in those days. That was what interested me most about his business trips. Not where he was going, but how he got there. And those, I think I was always just infatuated by the big airplanes. Still to this day, I'm a kid. I have to have my wife laughs, because I have to have the window seat always, whenever we travel. That's really important to me, because I'm just so fascinated by the magic of flight. I think I always have been. I grew up in a house where we had some hallways, and I always converted those hallways into runways with little model airplanes and set up airports and things. But I wasn't alone. Lots of my friends were doing that. It was something that we were all fascinated by, the magic of flight, aviation, big airplanes, speed, things that were just so interesting and fun, and I think achievable. I think at some point too, we always know we can go out and get our pilot's license. We just don't often know how accessible it is. We know it's achievable, we just don't know how accessible it actually is. Good
point. How are you tied into or related to the EAA Young Eagles program?
Well, no sort of official tie-in with the Young Eagles program. However, I do a lot of events that revolve around EAA chapters. And when I come to do an event, if I'm a speaker for an EAA chapter event, they usually have a Young Eagles program around that. They organize it around that because it's a great opportunity for me to talk with the kids, and maybe perhaps more important, the parents, and talk about the value of learning to fly. And then they can take these kids up and teach them to fly. The Young Eagles program is great. It's a great opportunity to get kids into it. What we need to do is assist that program by then making sure that there is a place for those kids to go to pursue it. And that, in some cases, is I think where unfortunately we're not doing as good of a job as we could. And that's what I hope to achieve with the You Can Do It tour.
For years, and the way I started was hang around the airport a lot, maybe get a job washing airplanes, sweeping floors, I hate windows, and any other thing that we could do in exchange for a little bit of flying time. But it seems like most of the FBOs that I visit at the various airports across the country, they don't want the kids around, in part because of the work hazard, the environment. We got the rules too. How do you think that we can come around motivating the young pilots enough where they've got the funds in order to learn to fly, or they can trade something out?
Well, if we look at what you said with the, that's interesting, trade something out. I'll speak to that in a minute. If you look at the FBOs and you look at your average general aviation airport, your average airport, what do we have now that surrounds them? Fences. So that's a big difference. And this is one of the reasons why in the You Can Do It tour, the public event is off airport. I'm not trying to, again, it's not about bringing people to aviation, it's about bringing aviation to people. So I do those public events off the airport in places where the public is already comfortable, where they're already familiar with the local high school auditorium, community center, coffee shop, whatever it is. Not drag them around the fence to some hangar somewhere and put them in a place and tell them this is for them. So I think there's an inherent problem now that we have with fences around airports and things like that. But there are other issues too that I try to address through my pilot roundtables and pilot events, which is that pilots in general we're upset, I think. We're upset at the state of aviation. We're upset about the costs. We're upset about the regulations. And that negatively impacts our ability and desire to showcase our enthusiasm for it and to invite people to become a part of it. I think we forget how amazing it is because we've become wrapped up in our own economics and our own issues that we have with aviation. So I think that's something that hopefully we can counter, and I think that'll make a change. If then more pilots are more excited about aviation, they're going to invite more people around the fence and have younger kids involved with airplanes. And then getting back to the costs and trading, one of the funny things is that when I first met my CFI, I didn't know he was a CFI at the time. I met him as a friend, and I said, I found out he was a pilot. And I said, I've always wanted to do that. And he said, well, I'm a CFI. I said, great, what's a CFI? It's another problem. We speak in acronyms too much. So the public doesn't understand what we're talking about half the time. But what's a CFI? He said, I'm a flight instructor. I said, well, I've always wanted to learn to fly. And he said some very important words to me at that point. He said, I've always wanted to learn how to play guitar. So we traded. We traded guitar lessons for flight lessons. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to do things like that help, with the cost issues and make flight training more accessible.
Now, you were saying that you got started because your wife encouraged you, and yes, it always takes somebody to sometimes kick us out of our rut and try something new. As you progressed through your flying and you were working toward that rating, what did you plan on doing beyond that? As you were working towards your first rating, what did you think you were going to do in the future?
Honestly, I don't think I thought too much about that. And it's because I never thought about the rating. I never thought about the license. And that's something that I often tell flight schools. We focus too much on the certificate. If we focus more on the experience, on the journey, then also part of that cost factor goes away. So, I would go to the airport not to go earn my my pilot's license. I'd go there to learn to fly an airplane. That was the focus. And it's one of the reasons why today people always ask me, were you going for a certificate? Are you going for this rating, that rating? No, I just go and fly airplanes. It's the experience. Put me in an airplane that I've never flown before with a flight instructor. That means more to me than going after a particular certificate. And I think that that all relates to the experience and the cost factor. Because, when people are given a certain number of hours in which they're supposed to get their license, and they do the calculations, so it's supposed to happen in a certain cost, and then it doesn't because it takes longer, as it often does, which is perfectly understandable for all sorts of good reasons. Then all of a sudden they start to think that aviation is expensive again. But if they're just pursuing it because every day they go to the airport and have really just a wonderful time with their flight instructor in the journey of learning to fly, then aviation is an activity like any other activity, like golf, like any other leisure activity, in fact, or any other educational activity. It's an experience. It's not a means to an end. It's the journey.
And I think that's the key to it. And when I came through the system, I was the same way. I enjoyed every day. I enjoyed the flying. I never really thought about the end. But the challenge was I learned a little bit more every day until I had the knowledge and skill to pass the test.
Right.
And a lot of people think that they can come in and do it because it's as easy as driving a car. But to a certain extent it is. And then it's a little more challenging in other areas. But look what you can do with an airplane today that you can't do with a car. You can hop in an airplane and in a couple hours be at a destination that would take you all weekend to drive. So it opens up a whole new world to us.
You know, one of the videos that I show in the high school presentations was just taken 2 weeks ago in Chicago, where I'd flown in commercially, got on my rental car, drove to a small airport, jumped in a 172 with a flight school partner for the You Can Do It tour, and I piloted the plane, and we went to lunch at another airport, you know? And it's not just a $100 hamburger in a sense, but it's an experience, right? We don't go for the food, we go for the experience. And so I showed this video. I said, you know, yeah, you could drive down the street to your local restaurant, or you can land on the runway. You can pull into the parking lot of the local restaurant like you're used to doing in your car or in your plane, complete with valet parking. You know? So it's a great experience to do something like that, and one that only, 0.16% of us get to do. It's remarkable.
Yeah, you just can't get curb service anymore at the airplane. Well, now that you've got your certificate and you've got your flight time, and at this point you've got enough experience, you can carry a passenger. Do you have as much fun flying and showing it to somebody else as you did when you were flying alone?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think what I enjoy most are telling people and showing people through video about my flights. I think that's one of the things that's most exciting. So, you know, earlier this year in January, I took off in a neat little French plane, a Robins plane, from west of Paris, and flew up to the coast of Normandy with a friend of mine who's a French pilot, over these gorgeous chateaus and, you know, the types of perspectives that only a pilot would get to see, because even as a passenger flying into Charles de Gaulle in Paris, you're never going to see that. So only in a small airplane, in a general aviation aircraft, can you really appreciate that vantage point. And those are the kinds of things that really make aviation fun. I mean, I remember just that flight alone reminded me why I wanted to become a pilot. It is that experience. And then being able to photograph, film that, put them in my presentations for the You Can Do It tour, and show people this is the view that so few of us get. Join us. It's amazing, and it's worth it.
Well, I can tell that it's in your blood.
I'm tense.
And I hate to say this, but the unfortunate part is you'll never get it out the rest of your life.
I hope not.
Yeah, we're going to have fun every day. Well, this about brings us to the close of this presentation. Ravi, certainly enjoyed the discussion with you on being an ambassador, working with the kids, and looking forward to the rest of the tour. And I hope that the continued progress, that you expanded into other areas.
Well, thank you. I'd like to invite the audience to come to youcandoittour.com and learn about the tour, or Raviator.com and learn about me.
Okay. Well, we're so glad you could be with us, Ravi.
Thank you very
much. And we'll look forward to seeing you at another Sun and Fun.
Absolutely.
And thank you for joining us at the Florida Aviation Network. I'm your host, Walt Schammel, and we're going to see you at the next one.